Reducer hook basically handles the state transitions based on the information provided by the action. It's also an alternative to useState. We can use a reducer hook for everything we can do with the state hook. But there are a couple of things to know before using the reducer hook. So it looks like using state hook is way easier and simpler, but reducer hook gives a more concrete way to handle complex states like nested state structure, or the case of the next state depends on the previous state. So let's understand the reducer hook. useReducer takes two arguments and one optional argument. First, the reducer function specifies how the state will change and this initial value. So there are two ways to initialize the state of this useReducer. First, pass this initial value as a second argument, or pass this init function as a third argument. And it lets us create the initial state lazily, which means we delay initializing the initial state until the first time this is needed. And this useReducer will return an array of two items, the current state and dispatch function, which we have to call to update our state. So before we try the reducer hook, let's think of how we're gonna use it. So we'll be making a simple to-do app using state, context, and reducer hooks. First thing, two text inputs for the task and tag with the save button. And there will be a component which displays this saved item with the delete button. And this list component will wrap all these items. We will use state hook to store text input values. And we will have to pass the reducer and initial state to use reducer hook. So the initial state will have the empty array of the task list. And reducer will handle state by the action types, save and delete. We will wrap all of this with context provider, and this task list component will consume the state from the context. And this task item component will consume the dispatch function from the context for delete action. I guess now we have a good picture of our small app to practice reducer hook. So let's go to the code example. So here I already have added the text fields for task and tag inputs, and onChange will update the state of this form. This is how it looks now. So to start using useReducer, the first thing we have to do is defining the initial state and creating a reducer function. I'm creating an initial state, and this state will hold a list of tasks, and the task has ID, name, and tag. And the context will hold a state and dispatch. I've already made the interface for this task data here, and now I'm making a reducer function. We'll take state and action type will be just save and delete. To save, I'll pass the ID and task detail together. So I'm adding type for these details, and the task will be deleted by ID. So delete action will just come with task ID. And switch statement. Let me just create save and delete without default. And I'm getting constant for the action type cases. And the new task info will be added in the list array. And for deleting, we'll use a filter function to have the tasks that ID is different from the selected one to be deleted. And now I'm creating a context and passing the task data as a default value. Now I'm gonna use reducer hook, pass the reducer function we just created and initial state. And it returns state and dispatch. I'll wrap this component with the context provider and pass this state and dispatch as a value for the descendants of this provider to have an access to this value. If you want to understand the context hook better, you can check out the previous video, how to use context and context hook. Let's display the saved items now. I have a component called task list and using useContext to have an access to the list of tasks in state. I'm mapping the task item component and I pass the mapped item as a property. I'm displaying the task name and tag. And I'll have the use context here to have an access to the dispatch for delete action. And time to test. Oh, I forgot using useReducer, so going to add this dispatch on save button on click. I'm using React UID library to generate unique ID. So let me import this and pass the rest of task details with the type save. Now testing again. Saving and deleting works. So this video was about how to use Reducer hook, and the example of the to-do app was to review Reducer, state, effect, and context hook together.